How we doing, everybody? It's Wardy here, and as you guys can see, we're back at it breaking down all the latest news and rumblings in Mets land. And today, that being November 12th, 2025, we have another jam-packed discussion to get into right here, right now, because we're in the heart of GM meetings, baby, which means that David Stearns spoke to the media for the first time in a hot minute yesterday, and we broke down, for the most part, all of his key remarks and quotes there with the media in yesterday's video, not only regarding Stearns' thoughts on Alonso, Diaz, Senga, and more, but pairing that with our conversation regarding Tarik Skubal and Framber Valdez, deemed by the top insiders in Major League Baseball as the perfect fits for the Mets and their rotation for next season. So check out that video in its entirety after you've watched this one, because today we are here to talk about the man that you guys see beside me there, as yes, reports have come out over the past 12 hours, if not sooner, that yes, Cody Bellinger is absolutely a target here for the New York Mets. We're going to expand as to why this is, why you shouldn't be surprised by this, and ultimately how the Mets can find themselves prying another coveted outfielder away from their crosstown rivals, this time for a second consecutive offseason. From there, we're not only going to talk about Bellinger, but we're going to get into Edwin Sugar Diaz, the Mets star closer, as reporting has come out as of earlier today, at the time of this video dropping, stating what his contract demands likely are this offseason. We'll get into our initial reactions to that, and ultimately the likelihood, unlikelihood of Edwin returning for the Mets next season. And to wrap up this show, we're going to talk about a key quote that David Stearns had yesterday that I purposely pushed to today to talk about, and that has everything to do with Mets top outfield prospect Carson Benge and what his likely role will be to begin next year's spring training. That, along with Scott Boras' key remarks regarding Pete Alonso, as we're going to wrap up the show to play those, so you guys can check them out, as Boras has been actively speaking to the media at GM meetings at the time of this video dropping, is what we're going to get into. So all I ask everybody is that you hit that like and subscribe on your way in, as it's a fantastic way to support the platform. Let me know your initial thoughts and reaction in the comments down below to everything that we're going to get into. And as always, shout out to our amazing sponsors at SeatGeek to have you covered for all of your ticketing needs, everybody. SeatGeek has over 70,000 active events to choose from, making them the #1 rated ticketing app in the game today for a reason. And you guys can use them by simply utilizing my promo code link down below in the description, WARDY10, WARDY10, because you're going to get 10% off, whether it's NFL tickets, NBA tickets, NHL tickets, concert shows, comedy shows, or if you're going to do what I'm doing this weekend, all thanks to SeatGeek for their fair and honest tickets available, and that's by using them twofold. I will be attending Madison Square Garden Saturday night this upcoming weekend for the biggest card of the year in UFC, which I'm very excited about. And before that, earlier in the day, I'll be in Flushing, Queens for the first time in a hot minute. I'll be at Citi Field attending a baseball game between Team Puerto Rico and Team Dominican Republic. And that is all thanks to my awesome friends at SeatGeek again, everybody. So check them out. Link down below. WARDY10 for 10% off your next ticket purchase. And speaking of that event at Citi Field this Saturday, again, guys, I will let you know where I'll be sitting on my community tab on YouTube around Saturday itself in the morning, so that way you guys can look out for me, hang out, chop it up with me should you guys have interest. I'm really looking forward to seeing many amazing Mets fans there. I'm really looking forward also to seeing the former Mets that'll be in attendance as either players or coaches, which include the following. Shout out to Michael Mayer for the breakdown here at Mets Rise. This includes Carlos Delgado will be the manager of one, Carlos Gomez will be the manager of another, Carlos Beltran will be the bench coach that we're going to see, Robinson Cano, Robinson Cano will be there, but Robinson Cancel will be there as a coach as well, Anderson Hernandez will be there as a coach, Jorge Lopez, everyone's favorite Mets reliever, so nobody will be there, Ray Willie Gomez will be a coach, Joneshy Fargas, shout out to him on those 2020 Mets, if you know, you know, Joely Rodriguez, the southpaw that really was never all that great here for a one-and-done season, he is back at Citi Field, and more. So very excited for this weekend's matchup, to say the least, everybody. But without further ado, let's go ahead and let's get right into this one. And one final thing, we're going to be live again tonight, 9 p.m. Eastern, with my man, you guys know him very well, good friend on the platform, Mark Luino, aka Draftneck Mark, one of the most dominant YouTubers in the game when covering Major League Baseball. He's also the co-host there of the Mets Podcast, and is also the co-host of the Wind Up Show. So make sure to check out all that respective content. But we're going to be live tonight for a big live stream going over the latest news and rumblings, because more information is going to come out today inevitably regarding the GM meetings, not only with Alonso, with Diaz, with external targets, and a whole lot more. So I'm really looking forward to hearing Mark's perspective on it all. Hope to see you guys tonight, as we're going to be answering questions and all that kind of fun stuff. Now, guys, as you guys can see here, let's begin by starting with the report that came out last night. No one really batted an eye to it, and I bookmarked it last night because I was like, oh yeah, this is going to be a perfect discussion piece for today, that being November 12th, and it is. Guys, the Mets are in fact interested in Cody Bellinger, per John Heyman of the New York Post. Now, The reason why I say no one should be surprised by this is because Bellinger is without a doubt one of the most feasible free agent player position options the Mets could find themselves landing this offseason. And there's multiple reasons as to why this is, and we're going to break this all down in real time right here, right now, why that is. But if you guys have seen our content over the past month and a half, then you know that I've had Bellinger right on the Mets radar from the start of their season reaching its conclusion. When I did my initial breakdown on the Mets' top overall targets this offseason in the free agent trade market, I featured Cody Bellinger in that discussion, and here's the exact reasons as to why this is. Because as we know, Bellinger makes a lot of sense as a feasible fit for the New York Mets, but he makes even more sense when you bear in mind the current status of what their roster is heading into 2026. And I really think back to David Stearns' key remarks that, of course, wanting to shore up the Mets both offensively and defensively. And we are also very aware in regards to the Mets defense that it's not necessarily something that the Mets need to be the best team in baseball defensively next year, but they certainly need to upgrade in what was a failed final couple months, especially per what David Stearns said to the media yesterday at the time of us talking right now. But in case you guys have been living under a rock, here are Bellinger's numbers from this past season. He's now officially a free agent as that player option he utilized as he opted out, and he doesn't have a qualified offer attached to him because he's already had a QO thrown at him from the past, if I'm not mistaken, during his time in Chicago. And this is huge, okay? Because if there's one thing that deters a lot of teams from going after top talents in the free agent market, it is a qualified offer. It's having to give up compensation picks as well as money for the draft that you don't otherwise want to do. For maybe guys that are needle movers for your roster, might be good, but might not be great enough to warrant that decision. Cody Bellinger is one of the top free agents that does not have a qualifying offer attached to him, as coming off of a tremendous year in the Bronx with the Yankees, as we see, with 89 runs scored, 29 home runs, 98 RBIs, 13 stolen bags, a 272, 334, 480 clip, good for a 5-WAR season, and 25% above league average as a batter that we all see there. A lot of love about Cody Bellinger, but the main reason as to why the Mets love him and why they're targeting him right now is because regardless as to what the future is for Pete Alonso, Bellinger can fit this team right now. But especially in a scenario where, say, Pete Alonso does in fact walk, Bellinger becomes all the more desirable at that point in time, as long as he's not off the market before, say, Alonso reaches his decision, which honestly may happen given how Alonso's not going to rush negotiations this time around in the second consecutive offseason. But Bellinger, he's a proficient defender in multiple positions, and that is a hard thing to find, especially in the free agent market. He can play first base for you without a problem. He can play center for you without a problem. He can play the corner outfields for you without a problem. Cody Bellinger is as versatile as they get while still doing it at a respectable rate. That's why he was a 5-WAR player this past year, and that's why he's also a perfect balance from offense to defense. Then you add in the personality. Bellinger's always kind of been this goofy, fun personality that we've seen, but takes his baseball very seriously. So much so that he has, of course, been a World Series champion going back to his time with the LA Dodgers. So he certainly knows what it takes to win in the big moments, and he's dominated in big markets, whether it's been in LA with the Dodgers or in his short stint there in Chicago with the Cubs, or potentially his one-and-done year as a New York Yankee, which may very well happen. For all those reasons, David Stearns, Steve Cohen, I'm sure, is salivating at the mouth to acquire someone like Bellinger this offseason. Now, what would be the biggest hindrance as to why the Mets do not bring in Bellinger? Well, it will be twofold. It will be A, say, bringing back Pete Alonso, which maybe makes a Cody Bellinger pursuit less imperative for them. Or B, and this is probably more than likely the reason as to why the Mets wouldn't sign Bellinger, is if he simply gets a massive long-term deal, obnoxious deal that really no team wants to touch for various reasons. Because Bellinger is entering his age 31 season, has of course had some ups and downs with his offense that we've seen over the years, which I'm sure definitely went in hand with his injuries, because we know he had a plethora of injuries leading to his departure with the LA Dodgers. But Belly this past season taking advantage of the short porch and just really looking good in a Yankee uniform, the way that Juan Soto did. And that's why you should be very optimistic about the Mets landing him, because the Mets obviously paid a lot of attention to Belly this year as a crosstown rival there in the Bronx. And Bellinger in this Mets lineup, again, yes, he's a lefty bat, so that might be the most unappealing thing to him. We went from being in a world where the Mets did not have nearly enough lefty bats to now they have an abundance of them. Between Lindor getting more reps on the left side than the right naturally, to Juan Soto, to Brandon Nimmo, to until he gets traded Jeff McNeil, among the many other pieces the Mets have in this organization right now, they're probably more in a position to go after a right-handed bat at power, with the exception of Pete Alonso. But Bellinger is showing you his ability to not only dominate against both righties and lefties at a quality rate, but as someone who's very much still in the peak prime of his career and can be a lethal bat for you anywhere from a 4 to a 6-4 player every single season, while hopefully giving you around, again, 25 to 30 plus home runs and north of 100 RBIs. And even if Bellinger fluctuates a little bit and finds himself with some seasons more in the 20 home run category, and 80 RBI category, that still is more than feasible for all the other attributes that he has, with his very strong defensive upside that we see in various positions when the Mets have a glaring hole in center field right now. And they could also get creative with Bellinger and kind of use him in a scenario where you just have Belly as maybe your stopgap option in center until Benge would really blossom and prove himself at the major league level. So maybe there's less pressure on the top prospect in Carson Benge to be considered for that role. And that's, hypothetically speaking, that the Mets would say bring Alonso back. So then what you would do is, if you would have Bellinger until Benge is clearly ready to hit the bigs and make an impact, then you can get creative about your roster. Is Pete Alonso having an appetite potentially to play more at DH than at first base? Because then you can shift Bellinger more into that position at first, so you can have Alonso get more consistent reps at DH. You can have Benge start to thrive there in center, and you have a nice balance of the veteran and youth movement here for an offense that will also benefit with the defense along with it. Various routes the Mets can go here, but needless to say, Cody Bellinger is absolutely one of the most perfect fits for the Mets of the position player that's currently out there in the free agent market. And this has nothing to do with the fact that he's a New York Yankee, but there's positives because he's a New York Yankee. His ability to handle the New York market that we saw this past season. His ability to stay afloat as a top bat in a fairly deep lineup. These are all things that Bellinger has comfortably done throughout his career over the past 5 to 7 years. I firmly believe he will continue to do that in his career in a big market, this time hopefully in Flushing, Queens with the Mets. So you guys let me know in the comments down below. Are you for or against a Cody Bellinger pursuit this offseason? The Mets are already in the market. They're already targeting him. They're already showing interest. So that's already begun. Now just a matter of, will they find themselves as the top bidder for him in the end, or will he find himself either A, returning back to the Bronx to be with the New York Yankees, or B, landing elsewhere and the Yankees lose another coveted bat from their outfield for a second consecutive offseason. To be determined on all those fronts, everybody. And I apologize, I'm actually going to double check just in real time to make sure that I don't miss anything, because people love to tag me and stuff all throughout the day, which I greatly appreciate. I'm especially shout out to NYM Mets fan Ray, City of Dreams. He tags me literally like everything imaginable regarding the Mets every day. I really appreciate that, because that helps me stay up to date on anything and everything regarding this Met. How fitting the next video that I was going to play is Pete Alonso highlights. It really is fitting, considering that Bellinger may very well be his replacement. And I will tell you guys this right here, right now. If Alonso does in fact not return in the hypothetical scenario, we're going to talk more about Alonso to conclude the video, as we're going to get to the key remarks from Scott Boras himself regarding the coveted polar bear. But if Alonso does walk, and it's out of the Mets' hands for the most part, Bellinger is more than likely the best option to replace him. You know, there's a lot of hype with Kazuma Okamoto, and I really do like him, but Bellinger's more of a guaranteed thing there at first base. And Bellinger's versatility is what really rings true most, I think, not only on his value for myself as a fan, but I'm sure for David Stearns and how the Mets are operating right now. There's no better guy out there that can play multiple positions proficiently while giving you a plus bat the way that Bellinger can absolutely do for you. And by adding a guy like Bellinger, that further makes Jeff McNeil more feasible to be traded, because then you basically completely take away his ability to play the outfield. And if you're going to have him pigeonholed to just second base, I'm pretty sure the Mets are either going to want to give Jet Williams a run there at second for this upcoming season, or they're going to trade Jet as part of a bigger deal. Either way, it's hard to envision Jeff McNeil being a part of this roster entering his age 35 season, when the Mets are looking for a culture shift as well for 2026 and beyond. But Belly, lots of love about Belly. Look at that great play there in the corner outfield, a stud. Also, Bellinger had one of his best defensive plays all year long, sadly, against our New York Mets that we saw. He had the gorgeous basket catch there, which was like an immaculate reception type vibe he had, doing his best Franco Harris impression there that we saw earlier this season, and then he got the massive double play on the Mets in that Subway Series game. I remember it like it was yesterday, and Bellinger has just stayed unbelievably steady in his career to this point. But now, guys, going on from Cody Bellinger, let's go on and talk here next on one Edwin Sugar Diaz, because we do have some stuff to get into in regards to Edwin, and I want to make sure that I pull that up for each and every one of you. And then after Edwin, we'll talk a bit about Carson Benge, as I mentioned, and then we'll get into those Scott Boras remarks. Also, I want to share this quote with you guys as well. Very interesting one regarding Mr. Sugar Diaz. And that has to do with the Mets potentially not having to worry about the LA Dodgers as much as we initially thought. And I'm not really surprised by this. I said this heading into this offseason, that while Diaz is going to have many suitors, having the qualifying offer attached to him is really going to play into the Mets' hand. And that's already ringing true as we're seeing this report. The Dodgers are not inclined to go 10 plus years on Kyle Tucker. They don't need Kyle Schwarber, obviously, and their starting rotation is obviously set there. You look at what's happening here. While they have plenty of room to maneuver for a trade, the most obvious move is to hope the second time's a charm in spending big money on a closer after Tanner Scott's disappearing act this year. Sign free agent closer Edwin Diaz. But what's fascinating about this is that while Diaz is a feasible fit for the Dodgers, there's already reporting that's come out today that's basically refuted this to a degree, which has suggested that the Dodgers are not likely to land someone like Edwin Diaz, given what their current player pursuit is this offseason. And you guys can see this from SNY earlier today. The Dodgers might not be a big threat to swipe Edwin Diaz from the Mets. And it's because of that qualifying offer. It's because of what Edwin Diaz is asking for as well. And knowing that the Dodgers are more than likely not going to strap themselves with multiple 4 or 5+ year contracts of top relievers when they can be very fickle in what you're getting in return. That obviously rang true last year with Tanner Scott, which was a horrible investment from the start on that contract. I never liked it then. I still don't like it now, as he was a non-factor for them in this year's postseason. But the point stands, the Mets are in pretty good position to bring Edwin back as long as there's mutual interest from both sides to really get this done. We know Edwin would love to come back. We know that there's already been remarks from David Stearns as of yesterday that he would love to have Diaz return. But what we found out today was a bit more on maybe what the demands, the asking prices, if you will, in regards to one Edwin Diaz. And let's go ahead and pull up what exactly those demands are, because we're going to just do this live in real time, everybody. Because I thought I had it pinned, but I guess I do not, but that's not a problem whatsoever. And there's Scott Boras. We're going to talk more about Scott here shortly. But going to Edwin Diaz, let's go into his remarks. Not remarks, but rather what I want to amplify today. So let's go ahead and let's find this one. Here we go. All right, guys. As you guys can see here from Underdog MLB, let's see. Edwin Diaz is seeking a deal similar to his record-setting 5-year, $102 million contract that he initially had with the Mets. Per Ken Rosenthal and Will Salmon. Shout out to Will, great friend here on the platform. We look forward to having him on here sooner rather than later again. But my initial reaction to this is, I'm not surprised. However, Diaz, if he's demanding at least another contract of $100+ million, it's hard to suggest that's a lock that the Mets are going to go there. Because while the qualifying offer is naturally going to hinder his market a bit and benefit a team like the Mets, how much do the Mets have an appetite to run it back with Edwin Diaz entering his age 32 season on another 5-year contract? And as I initially stated heading into the offseason, I said that I would be genuinely shocked a little bit if David Stearns would go there. Stearns does not strike me as one that's going to be willing to roll out the red carpet for Edwin to the point that he's giving another 5-year contract. Because Billy Epler was the man who helped negotiate and make that contract happen after the 2022 season for Diaz. And Edwin, as we know, he has been a star for the Mets for multiple years. His 2 best years as a New York Met have come in his walk years, and that isn't a coincidence. So while I expect Edwin to dominate next year, I do not expect him to post the same season of a stat line with 1.6 ERA and being the best closer in the game for the most part, outside of guys like Aroldis Chapman, who clearly blossomed as, a guy in his first year in Boston with the Red Sox. Over 13 K per nine to 2.8 walks per nine, an amazing K to walk ratio for Edwin Diaz, who just strikes at everybody and their mother like it's nobody's business. But Diaz's value is imperative for the Mets on not only run prevention, but having a surefire guaranteed thing as to what your star closer will be entering the 9th inning. Edwin was our lone certainty in this bullpen this year, with the exception of Brooks Raley, who returned mid-season from injury. But if there was one thing we could count on, it was Edwin Diaz. Everything else, not so much. So now you ask yourself, the Mets now have David Stearns, who has been notoriously a bit more conservative in the types of moves they operate, with the exception of Soto and Alonso, because, again, Steve Cohen had his hands on a lot of that. Not that Stearns didn't have plenty of hands and involvement too, because he did, but it all is because of Cohen's money. And this is where I really want to amplify the importance of Diaz. Not that I can single-handedly spend Cohen's money myself, but knowing that if Steve Cohen understands the value of Edwin Diaz at all the way that us fans do, this really should not be much of a debate as to is Edwin Diaz returning or not. He absolutely should be returning. And even at 5 years, $100 million, which would bring him to his age 37 season, we know how many relievers can blossom and thrive into their mid to late 30s, and Edwin feels like he will be one of those guys that even if he starts to lose velocity, will be able to be creative on how he refines his arsenal, thanks to the Mets pitching lab to a degree, and how they're going to work with him every single year. For Diaz, it's not only about staying healthy and dominant, but it's ultimately about what's best for him and his family. and it's hard to envision a team that can pony up a better contract for him than the New York Mets this offseason. It's also hard to envision, to a degree, David Stearns giving a $100 million contract to Edwin Diaz after you already rewrote the market with that $100 million contract, the first reliever in Major League Baseball history to land such a contract 3+ years ago. So for Edwin, how much of it is a priority to get the same deal again as it is to maybe just get more on the similarity in AAV, even if that means that maybe it will land more on a 4-year deal or maybe a 5th-year option? I think the Mets will be very creative in the world that they bring Edwin Diaz back. And when I say creative, I mean that in the sense of bringing someone back who will obviously be a massive impact for them. And I apologize if you hear a dog barking. Of course, my dog has to bark their head off right now because I believe I have family coming over a half hour earlier than what they were supposed to. That's what happens when the elders get a time frame of 5 p.m. They're like, oh, that means 4:20 or 4:30. That's just how it goes sometimes. So that's okay. Point is, getting back and reeling in from that tangent for a second, is that Edwin Diaz's value is instrumental for this organization. And it really is hard to see a world where they can properly replace him. Not that there aren't very good relievers out there. Not that the Mets can't develop their own potentially in-house with guys like Dylan Ross and Ryan Lambert knocking on the door. The point still stands, though. Diaz is that certainty. And if you're in a win-now window the way that the Mets are, with Juan Soto and Francisco Lindor and Brandon Nimmo to a lesser degree, you have to take advantage of these peak prime windows. And that's by bringing Edwin Diaz back. Steve Cohen has more money to flex at any other owner in baseball by a wide margin. And that's not that he has literally $22 billion, because net worth is not the same as what you have actively in your bank account. But the point stands, even after losing $350 million this past season, which is what Steve Cohen lost running the Mets, he's not batting an eye to it, and he's planning to spend big time this offseason going scorched earth, knowing how important it is for the Mets to not only bring Sugar back, but to make their team better than what we saw in 2025, this time for 2026. So Edwin Diaz, do I think he will return? Barring changes, I do think he will return this Mets team, honestly. And I think that he will land in a similar fashion of a contract. I do hope that the contract is more in the range of, say, 80 to 85 million, and then you say you have 25 to 30 plus million deferred. I think the Mets will be a bit more creative with their deferred options this offseason if they are going to learn anything from the Dodgers playbook. And not that they need to. I like to make that clear. They don't need to do this. But if there's one way to kind of take advantage of the tax bracket of once you're taxed over 90% of every cent you spend, once you hit $300 million or more, aka the Steve Cohen tax, and the Mets can avoid that to a certain degree by having deferred payments, why not go ahead and do that, right? So I think the Mets are not only going to take pages out of the Dodgers playbook with deferred payments a bit more this offseason, but I think it's going to ring true for someone like Edwin Diaz where it makes sense for both sides. Because remember, Tanner Scott's 4-year contract over $70 million includes over $20 million in deferred money. So while the Dodgers don't have as much immediate money that they can spend as Steve Cohen and the Mets do, they're going to be running in similar fashion. And I'd imagine that that's a route that the Mets may find themselves going down. So you guys, again, let me know on if you're for or against Edwin Sugar Diaz returning to this Mets team. For me, I want the best closer in baseball. And you really don't have to look any farther than the man who's been here the past 5+ years, who has dominated in more ways than one, at Edwin Sugar Diaz. And the worst thing that we could possibly see happen is that Edwin not only leaves the organization, but he goes to a rival like the Dodgers. I mean, should we even watch next season if that were to happen? Like, let's be honest with ourselves. Like, as much as we love this Mets team, we need to do something to break up this Dodger dynasty. And in order to do that, you not only need to flex your financial guns the way the Mets have with Steve Cohen, but you need to go above and beyond what we have seen in years prior. Not to act like a drunken sailor, but to spend a lot on the right guys worth it because you're in a win-now stage. You can do that without hurting the long-term window because the farm is unbelievably great right now. And even if the Mets dip into that farm to say trade a blockbuster for Tarek Skubal among others, they can do that comfortably, probably better than any other team in baseball right now. The Mets have been building this up the past 5 calendar years since Steve Cohen became owner to get to this point, to have an elite farm with an abundance of talent that they can part ways with and blossom internally, as well as, of course, pairing that with veterans who are going to dominate at the major league level right here, right now. Edwin Sugar Diaz, I hope to see you return, my guy. And once we find out more information regarding Edwin and his offseason, we, of course, cover it here on the platform. But now, guys, going on from Edwin Diaz, let's go on from talking about Edwin to getting into one Carson Benge. And this is another exciting discussion I'm really looking forward to getting into, because if you guys have not followed the platform, this season was the first year over our 5 years of covering the Mets that we covered prospects for the most part weekly throughout the entirety of the season. And that was really enjoyable. There was even times where we were covering it daily for multiple months on end. And in the process, I learned a lot about Carson Benge, the coveted first-round pick out of OSU, former teammates of Noah McLean, who's looking to pair with Noah McLean at the major league level next season, as he was the first ever draft pick by David Stearns as Mets president going back to 2024. And speaking of David Stearns, Stearns spoke to the media in regards to Carson Benge yesterday. And I'm going to just have you guys listen in as to what he had to say. And again, if the audio levels are a little messed up, that's just because my audio levels are not the same as S and Y's as much as I would like them to be. So apologies in advance if it's not exactly the same here. But listen up to what David Stearns has to say regarding Carson Benge.
Who's your center fielder right now?
Who's our center fielder? Yeah. I think we have a couple of options. I think Tyrone Taylor has proven he can play out there at a high level defensively. Carson Benge is going to come into spring training with a chance to make our team, and we'll see where the offseason takes us beyond that.
So there's something really important to take away from that quote from Stearns. It's not only the fact that he views Carson Benge as someone who could potentially crack this team out of spring training, which is what I have been literally telling each and every one of you on the platform for the past, 3.5 months at minimum. And I don't say that as a way of I told you so, but rather, if you pay attention to Carson Benge, if you see how much he rised in the farm this past year, you should not be surprised that given the Mets' glaring hole at center, that they may prefer more of a stopgap option there at most, instead of, say, someone on a long-term deal because of how much upside Benge has. And while Benge did have his level of struggles once he got to the AAA level this past year, I would put an asterisk there because he did go on the injured list for the first time this season when he was moved up to AAA. And while he struggled to be afloat there offensively for a little bit, he really was finding his bat more in those final couple games. And also with the eye test, looked very good both offensively and defensively, even if the stats don't immediately tell you that. As this is the same Carson Benge that went from A-ball to AAA, 3 different levels all in the same season. I'm going to show you his numbers and highlights here in a second. But before I do that, I just want to reiterate that not only is it about valuing Carson Benge as a center field option next year, but it's not acknowledging Jet Williams as one. And the lack of acknowledgement when speaking about the Mets and their future for 2026, not speaking on Jet Williams' name, tells me that not only is Jet Williams behind Carson Benge when evaluating center field, which I already knew, but maybe you guys were unaware of that, but two, it does make one ponder, is Jet Williams a more feasible fit to be traded in a blockbuster deal than other prospects? And what I've been saying is, yes, I like Jet Williams a lot. I do not want to see the Mets trade him. But if the Mets are going to pony up the dough, which is quality assets in the farm for someone of significance now, they can bite the bullet by doing so because they still have an abundance of riches in their infield options. As of now, they have Brett Beatty, Mark Vientos, Ryan Mauricio, Luis Angel Acuna. I'm not saying that all of them are going to be here next year because they most certainly won't be. I'll be shocked. At least one, if not multiple, will be traded inevitably, it feels like. But the point stands. Carson Benge is a true outfield profile for you in the ways that Jet Williams is more of a balance between second. Jet is more of a Jeff McNeil in the sense that he can play second for you fine, he can play center for you fine, isn't known for his size and stature. Him and I are around the same size. I'm a short schmuck, just for context. When I interviewed him a couple years ago, it was kind of crazy to be at shoulders length with him. I'm not used to that, especially talking to a player, mind you. But Jet has all the tools to be something special at the major league level, but Carson Benge is more polished. Not only is Benge more polished, but he knows what it takes to win, having great success at OSU. And that transition from college to now the Major League Baseball's affiliate there from low A all the way up to AAA has boded him unbelievably well. And we've seen really no hiccups in Benge's development in the way that with Jet Williams you had to a degree, mainly because of the injury that he sustained in 2024. Had a really good 2025 that we saw for Jet Williams. But again, it does appear the Mets view, at least to a degree, in higher regard Carson Benge than maybe Jet Williams for guys that have the immediate ability to impact this team now. I think Benge has a greater opportunity to impact the Mets in the first month or two of the season than Jet Williams as things currently stand. I could be wrong in saying that, obviously, but I'm just kind of going in hand with what David Stearns relayed to the media here. So in case you guys are unaware as to just how talented and how good Carson Benge was this past season, let me enlighten you. Because like I said, Benge was a beast. Nothing short of it, as a matter of fact. And as you guys can see down here below, some of his highlights, splitting time with the, not only A-ball, but then you saw the Rumble Ponies at the AA level where he dominated when he was with the Rumble Ponies, guys. I mean, literally dominated. Buddy was batting like 350 his first 2.5 weeks there. He was insane. So good. If not 400. He raked with the Rumble Ponies. He had some success with the AAA affiliate where he had a cup of coffee there before the end of the season. But in 116 total games from the Brooklyn Cyclones to the Rebel Ponies, to there and the Syracuse Mets, we have 15 home runs, 73 RBIs, 68 walks, 22 stolen bases, a 281 average, and an 857 on base, OPS rather. But it doesn't just stop there. Benge can play in multiple aspects of the outfield for you. There are some conflicting reporting from scouts suggesting that Benge is a better center field profile, or no, he's clearly a better corner outfield profile. And I will just say this. Benge needs to make sure that he's not a defensive liability in order for the Mets to consider him at center. If he's not, then we're cooking. If he is, then we may find ourselves with a bit of a problem, because the Mets do not want that to be the case. But the Mets are in a perfect position for Carson Benge, and here's why. Even if Benge is, say, hypothetically underwhelming in spring training and doesn't crack the team out of camp, maybe the way that some, including David Stearns, were initially hoping, and let's say the only thing the Mets did outfield-wise was to add a stopgap option, not named Cody Bellinger, but someone on the shorter-term end with less upside. Even in that scenario, you're really not losing sleep over it, because the expectations that Benge will be with this team by the halfway mark of this season at worst. And I really do think he will be there before then. Like I've been saying, I think Benge is going to ball out in spring training and press so much that he will be the Mets starting center fielder out of camp. That's why I'm not sold on the idea that the Mets are going to land a clearly high-quality outfield option this offseason. I would love Cody Bellinger, but I think Bellinger's value is more in hand with the Mets' glaring need of an Alonso replacement should he not return, paired with what center field looks like. Bellinger makes an abundance of reasons of sense, but if they do not go down that route, it'll not shock me in a sense, because maybe they want to make sure that Benge is not blocked long term. Because if you bring back Alonso, Bellinger is more of your profile at outfield than anything, unless they go down the route, which I also suggested earlier in the video, which was to shift Alonso more to DH. We all want to see Alonso more at DH. I think you're fooling yourself if you don't want to see Alonso more at DH. And that home run that he just hit in the highlights, by the way, was in the Lehigh Valley against the Iron Pigs, of course, and that was against Andrew Painter, the top pitching prospect for the Phillies. I, of course, attended the baseball game before this day, in which Cody Senga got rocked, sadly, there that we saw in his rehab outing of like 4 innings. And that's why the Mets didn't call him up, because he clearly didn't have it. And they didn't get any hits like at all. The next day, we saw Carson Benge hit a home run. I'm pretty sure Jet Williams hit a home run that game as well. Ryan Clifford had a bomb. Everybody and their mother was hitting tanks in that series, just for every game that I wasn't attending, because that's sadly how things go. But the point stands, everybody. Carson Benge has immense upside. He's someone that the Mets really do believe can impact them at the major league level next season. And this will absolutely play in hand to a degree in how the Mets operate this offseason. Now, do I think that the Mets are going to allow Carson Benge to be the reason as to why they don't sign Cody Bellinger? No, I don't believe that to be true. I think it would be malpractice, as a matter of fact, if the Mets went out of their way not to bring in someone like Bellinger solely because of Benge when he's filled with uncertainty still. If the Mets are trying to have this youth movement while also being in a win-now stage, they need to operate as such by adding as many guys to impact them greatly for the now and for the future, but also having that wiggle room where Benge can find himself prospering in the organization on the roster at some point next season, even if it is not, say, to begin spring training. But knowing that David Stearns mentioned him as a center field option already for next season is clearly telling of how not only the organization views him, but ultimately how much they may value him more than some of the other coveted position player prospects the Mets actively have in the organization currently. So Mets fans, let me know all your thoughts in regards to Carson Benge, if you're for or against him potentially cracking this team in the outfield out of spring training next year. I'm going to be rooting hard for him, and I cannot wait to see him again pair back with his good buddy and former teammate at OSU, who's now the ace of this Mets rotation that we found out this past calendar year, and one Noel McLean. Now, folks, last but not least, let's go ahead and let's see what Scott Boras, yes, the Scott Boras, had to say in regards to the Polar Bear Pete Alonso and much more today, everybody. Let's go ahead and see what he has to yap about. Also, apologies for the pop-up here. Did not mean to do that. All right, guys. Let's now hear Scott Boras speaking on Pete Alonso. And like I said, you might just need to put your audio slightly up. That way you hear it in its entirety. Here is Boras talking about Alonso's defense. Oh, I'm sure he's going to talk down on it. Yeah, said nobody.
What would you say about concerns about his defense as far as his range goes?
When you look at the number of first basemen that can play 100 games, you'd have to rank Pete right up there in the top 7 or 8, because there aren't many first basemen that can play first base and keep the position. They just don't want to play people there, forgive the pun, but it's become a platoon, except for Pete. You know.
What would you say about concerns about his defense as far as his range?
So again, he says, when you look at the first baseman that can play 100 games, you would have to rank Pete right up there in the top 7 or 8. While I agree, availability means nothing if you are a massive liability at the position. And do not get it twisted. Alonso is. Every metric tells you that he is. Yes, he's stopped a lot more errors from happening thanks to Mark Vientos botching throws at third base or whoever is going to be there at the hot corner outside of Brett Beatty. But point stands, Alonso throws his body more out there than any other first baseman in baseball. The fact that he stayed healthy to this point has been amazing. I don't know really how, but we're grateful for it to this point. He's very durable. But look at the yips tossing to first base that cost the Mets multiple times. Look at the botched throws to home that cost the Mets multiple times. While his offense will always outweigh his defensive ability, there's still something to be said about the Mets wanting to make this team better defensively. And they were a massive liability in their infield that we saw down the stretch in the final couple months of the season especially. So, again, I understand availability is important. I don't at all disagree with what Scott is saying there. But that only means so much if you were constantly the worst defensive first baseman in baseball the way that Alonso was this past season. And Alonso only has one technically good defensive season under his belt as a first baseman, and that came in the 2023 season when it meant nothing for the Mets as they went nowhere. Kind of similar to 2025 Mets, but he was also horrendous statistically in that position, and with the eye test, definitely struggled. Alonso's made some great picks at first base. I'm not saying he's bad there every single time, but the point is he has been too much of a liability for the Mets to want to lock him down there every day without at least considering him at DH. And that stubbornness that Alonso may have could hold true to be an X factor potentially in his decision-making this offseason. But for the Mets, they have to do what's right not only offensively, defensively, and everything in between for the roster construction. But to continue with Scott Boras' remarks, everybody, let's hear what he has to say from David Stearns and Steve Cohen's point of view.
You mentioned the fans' appreciation of Pete. Do you feel like the Mets front office feels the same way, appreciates him in the same way?
You know, I've met with David and Steve, and again, they're just really, really excited about the year that Pete had. Pete, in his own, again, the guy is such a worker. He made biomechanical adjustments from 24 to 25, which proved to be highly rewarding for him. The metrics that most teams look at were grandly improved, and so he really understands how to consistently take a bat and perform, and I think that's a credit to him for all of his work in the off season to achieve that.
Now, you guys didn't think that we were going to go a Scott Boras presser without some absurd wordplay, right? Look at this quote
With David and Steve.
that Mike Puma got from Scott earlier. Scott Boras on Pete Alonso. There's no doubt Pete's pursuers are primed to pay the power piper. Pete picked a perfect period to play preemptively at a primary position. I might have said that word wrong, preemptively. I apologize. A playoff parched plethora will pounce to participate in the polar plunge. So let's count them together. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. If I did my math right, which maybe I'm not a mathematician here, I'm just a schmuck talking about the Mets. 21 words with the start of the letter P. I'm just genuinely curious, Scott. Why didn't you put more in there? You know? Like, seriously. Talking about pushing P. Look no further than Scott Boras yapping about just this absurd wordplay in regards to Pete Alonso. I mean, when he talked on Alex Bregman, he said he hopes that we don't have ourselves a Brexit, which is just hilarious. You look at the comments that he made regarding Cody Bellinger. You look at just so many of the comments this man has made. I'm convinced that he is sitting there for hours on end before these days happen, writes them all down and memorizes them word for word constantly before having these pressers. I think Scott takes way too much pride in this, and I'm not going to say what I was going to say, but let's just put it this way. I think he thoroughly enjoys doing all this and the theatrics and just being a guy that you love to hate more than anything else. Last but not least, let's hear him talk a bit more on Alonso in regards to the fan point of view.
Scott, back to Pete for a minute. What do you think his, he's the franchise's all-time home run leader now. He's popular with the fans, a franchise player. What do you think that means to him as he looks at his future and what he might do?
Pete has been a lifetime Met, and obviously when he reflects on his career, it's all he has to look to. The one thing I think Pete understands, that playing in New York is not something most can do. To become a star-level player in New York, even fewer can do it. And so I think the New York fans recognize it, and they've been very, very outward and appreciative of him. He and Haley's involvement in the community has been received so well. He's in so many ways, from a production, middle lineup, he's an ideal franchise player, plays every day. And it's clear that the New York fans relate to somebody who is workmanlike, who is what Pete is. When I use the term pachydermium-like, I mean he is the elephant that goes out there every day. He is impenetrable, and he really knows how to manage the pressure of that situation. So I think it's something he's very proud of because of the fact that so few have achieved that standing.
And that was a really good breakdown by Scott, honestly. I think he hit the nail on the head. The importance of not only being a quality player, but doing it in New York consistently. There's something to be said for that. And he's 1,000% right. How many times have we seen guys land with the Mets and not work out? I mean, Cedric Mullins and Ryan Helsley will be the first examples you likely think of. But it goes way beyond that when we look at top players that the Mets have acquired in the free agent market over the years, among others. And there's so much that you're losing in Alonso, and one of them is the guarantee of a guy who knows how to dominate and handle this big market with the media and all. And that is an appetite that a lot of players don't typically have. But Alonso has been one of those rare few who has clearly blossomed in that category, as has been the case with Edwin Diaz. And Diaz, in my opinion, has been even more impressive because Edwin has faced significant adversity from the time he landed with the Mets to overcoming that. And a lot of guys can't get over that hump when they look bad when they first start out in New York, but he changed that narrative. Edwin Diaz was batting practice in 2019 and was far from a closer that anyone was hoping he'd be as part of that Jared Kelenic-Robinson Cano trade with, of course, Robinson Cano's agent, who was the Mets GM at the time, and Brody Van Wagenen. Fast forward a couple years there, you get the short 2020 season, looks solid. 2021, Diaz looks good, just not great in non-save or back-to-back situations. Then you look at him in 2022, his breakout year for the Mets essentially, and the walk year. You look at, of course, 2023. He was out all year with a knee injury, sadly, from the WBC. 2024, one of the better relievers in all the National League, was pumping over 100 on the gun there in the playoffs. Now 2025, one of the best closers, if not the best closer in baseball, in Edwin Diaz. Really, really appreciate Edwin's ability to constantly get over that hump of the early adversity he faced when landing with the Mets. And the fans, including myself, were giving him hell left and right, as we did not want Kelenic and actually traded at that time. But fast forward all these years later, no one's losing sleep over it. We all thank Brody Van Wagenen for that trade in hindsight, which is kind of crazy to say. Two quick things, and then we're out of here. One, we have one more quote from Scott Boras I'm just going to relay regarding Alonso, and I quote, "They're fully aware of his skill," that being the Mets, "but what I think they most pay attention to is the core element of what he can do to provide a team that consistency of 40 home runs, power, and production, because they're just not finding it. They're finding a lot of players in the market that are somewhat there and somewhat not." And he's not wrong. Alonso's really more in the category of himself, along with Kyle Schwarber and some other bats that are in the market. But when we talk 40 home runs, I mean, Alonso doesn't fall in that category. Alonso hasn't had a 40 home run season in 3 years. So, we can say all we want about, Alonso's this home run king for the organization, because he is. But what Alonso's also proven the past 3 seasons is that he's not at all luck to give you 40 home runs year after year. He is more in the category of being a 35 to 40 home run guy than he's a guy that's pushing 45 to 50. Now, can that change? Absolutely. I think Alonso has a lot more power and a lot more bombs left in the tank, to say the least. But whether that happens in Flushing, Queens, or elsewhere still has yet to be seen. And last but not least, this quote I thought was funny, going back to Cody Bellinger. Scott Boras says, going with the Top Gun Maverick references when talking about Cody Bellinger, urban maverick, versatile viper. If you guys know the movie, you understand the references here. In New York, he was a true Iceman. Scott, love him or hate him, he will stay the same. That is going to do it for our show, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And I will see you all, to everyone that watched this in real time the same day it dropped, for our live stream again, 9 p.m. Eastern. Myself and Mark Luino, a.k.a. Draftneck Mark. A massive GM meeting, Mets free agent frenzy discussion that we are going to have. I hope to see you guys there. Until then, everybody, have a tremendous rest of your night, day, evening, whenever you're watching this. This is your guy, Wardy, signing out. Peace out, folks. Let's go, Mets.